this way.
Did you get that? She said that really fast.
Yes, I got it.
Okay.
I'm nervous on this side.
Sorry. Please watch your step once it goes to the microphone.
Counsel?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Are you currently a judicial district court judge?
I am.
How long have you been on the bench?
Since 2019.
And were you elected or appointed?
Elected.
Since then, have you handled what we refer to as a mixed docket?
I have.
Can you describe what that is for the jury, please?
It means I do half criminal and half civil. So on some days I'm doing civil trials and calendars, and opposite days I'm doing criminal.
I want to focus in on criminal calendars. What types of matters are you handling on a day-to-day basis?
All types that come to the district court, which are basically felonies and gross misdemeanors.
Are there various types of hearings associated with criminal cases?
There are.
Would that include arraignments, guilty pleas, sentencings, revocations, and trials such as this?
It would.
Can you explain to the jury briefly what a guilty plea hearing is and how it unfolds?
A guilty plea hearing is when, obviously, most cases don't go to trial, they negotiate. And it's a negotiation between the defense attorney and the state. Defendant will enter into a guilty plea agreement. And then at the guilty plea hearing, we do a canvass. They review paperwork, sign off on it, and then we also engage them orally to make sure they understand everything they're doing and the rights that they're giving up in exchange for their guilty pleas.
Subsequent to a guilty plea hearing, is then the matter set for sentencing?
It is.
And what is a sentencing?
A sentencing is when they're going to be sentenced pursuant to negotiation or otherwise, whether they're going to get probation or prison. After we accept the guilty plea, we refer the matter to parole and probation. Parole and probation does what we call pre-sentence investigation report, criminal background, social background, medical background, all the history of the individual for consideration ultimately in passing sentencing.
Are there times in which a criminal defendant will appear in front of you out of custody?
Yes?
And are there other times in which they will appear in custody?
Yes.
As a result of that, are there some sentencing hearings in which people are remanded into custody from out of custody?
There are.
Are there security measures in place in the courtroom for these out-of-custody defendants as well as in custody?
Well, there's security in the courtroom. We have marshals and we have corrections officers watching. I don't know per se if there's anything special.
No, that answers the question. Are there times in which you will sentence someone to probation?
Yes.
Other times in which you may send them into custody, correct?
Yes.
When you sentence someone to probation, are they still monitored by the court in some way?
Not by the court, by parole and probation.
And what is parole and probation?
Parole and probation is the division responsible for supervising individuals that are on probation. They may have to report, they tell them what to do, help them find jobs, or put them in programming, get evaluations to see what kind of programming is best to serve that individual.
Are there times in which defendants who you've presided over will get probation, they'll go out into the community, and then they'll essentially mess up on probation and so on?
Yes.
And would they be brought back in front of you at that point in time?
Not right away. Sometimes P&P tends to work with them a lot of times to give them multiple chances. But at some point, when they get to a certain level, then parole and probation will put on what we call a violation report, saying that they're violating their probation. Judge, it's time for you to take a look. We think they should go do their time now.
And then that goes in front of you, and what's that proceeding called?
Revocation hearing?
At revocation hearings, do you essentially make a decision if the defendant should remain on probation or be remanded into custody?
Yes.
I want to bring you back to November 20th of 2023. On that date, do you recall whether or not you took a guilty plea from the defendant in a prior case?
I do not specifically.
Okay. When I say the defendant, do you understand who I'm referring to?
I do.
Who?
Mr. Redden?
Do you see Mr. Redden in court?
I do. Sitting between his two attorneys over there at the table.
Would the record reflect identification of the defendant?
Okay. There's three gentlemen and he's
The middle
right in
guy.
the middle?
Yep.
Okay, let the record so reflect.
So as you sit here today, you don't recall taking a plea from the defendant?
I do not.
If I were to show you a document that memorializes that plea, would that maybe refresh your recollection?
Yeah.
May I approach?
Yes.
Me.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
So I'm showing you court minutes as well as a guilty plea from November 20th of 2023. Are court minutes essentially a record of any court proceeding that happens
They are.
in the courtroom? Do you recognize your name on there?
I do.
And do you see journal entry which suggests that you took the defendant's plea?
Yes,
Okay. And that would be on November 20th of 2023?
correct.
Do you remember which charges he pled guilty to?
Attempt battery, substantial bodily harm.
Okay.
That I remember.
Okay. And so on this particular date, when you took the defendant's plea in the prior case, was he released from custody?
He was.
And was that pursuant to an agreement in the guilty plea?
Correct.
When he's released from custody, proceeding to follow the guilty plea?
Correct. The
What was
sentencing. The sentencing date.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about the sentencing date. You mentioned that you received some materials to review in order to prepare for a sentence.
Right.
And in this particular case, did you receive those materials?
I did.
And what were those materials?
Well, I always have the guilty plea agreement, so I know what the negotiations were, and the pre-sentence investigation report, primarily.
Primarily, you said? If sentencing was set in this case on January 3rd of this year, when would you have prepared your calendar and reviewed those materials?
Sometime in the week prior.
And
Usually
so-
closer in time, so I remember. I don't remember, because it was a holiday kind of time, it was our first day back. It may have been like the Friday before.
Okay. And so you know some things in advance about the defendant when you're going in to do a sentencing hearing, is that
Oh,
correct?
yeah,
Do you remember reviewing a PSI in this case?
I do.
Can you explain just briefly for the jury, when you're reviewing a PSI, what are the types of things you're looking for in order to determine the appropriate sentence?
Generally, the first thing, partly because it comes first in the PSI, is the age. Because depending on whether, if it's somebody older who's never been in trouble before versus somebody super young, a lot harder to send an 18-year-old to prison, to be honest. And just kind of, so age is what I look at first.
Continue.
And then I kind of peruse, is it somebody, do they have a lot of AKAs? That kind of gives you a little heads up. A look at the family background to kind of see what we're dealing with. Is this somebody who's had problems growing up? Has there been foster care kinds of situation? What's the family situation? A lot of times we'll have, dad's in prison, mom took off, raised by grandma. All those things that you're kind of mitigating maybe on some level the behavior, or trying to understand what you need to address and where you need to go. Obviously, one of the big things is the criminal history. I always jot down how many felonies, how many gross misdemeanors, how many misdemeanors, and then looking specifically at those, what types are they? Is this somebody who's got a drug issue that needs to be addressed? Are we looking at stolen identity of another, possessions of credit cards and stuff, which more often than not also indicates a drug problem, and where these crimes are focused. And then kind of in a separate category is violence. And sex offenders, I suppose, another one that are a little bit different.
Is prior violence an important factor for you when deciding whether to put someone back out on the streets or put them into custody?
Hugely.
And in this particular case, did you note prior violence in Mr. Redden's history when reviewing his PSI?
I did.
As you sit here today, do you have a recollection of any
I do.
specifics?
I know that when I did the PSI, he was about 30 years old, and his first criminal conviction was in 2012, battery domestic violence. So literally, he hit 18 and it's domestic violence on his record. And throughout the remainder, until I saw him again, he averaged one battery domestic violence conviction a year always. He had 3 felony convictions. He had an attempt theft that actually started out, it was pled to an attempt theft, but it started out as a robbery, which is the violent taking of property from someone else against their will, a classic crime of violence. He had 2 battery domestic violence felony convictions. You get a felony after you have so many misdemeanors, they start becoming felony. He had a battery with substantial bodily harm conviction. He had a gross misdemeanor for malicious destruction of private property, which started out as a attempt home invasion, meaning kicking in someone's home. Again, pled down to the malicious destruction. I believe that was the one I had him on probation for. I didn't recall it, but I've since learned that he was in my department on probation for that, and I ultimately revoked him because of the case that I was seeing him on back at the time of the attack.
Okay, so that's a lot of information.
I know, sorry. I
Okay.
do that.
I appreciate that.
Okay, do me a favor, both of you. Make sure you let him get his question out before you respond and vice versa. My court reporter is really good at what she does, but she's never mastered the art of taking down 2 people at the same time. Sorry.
In addition to criminal history, are you also reviewing the PSI to determine if that individual has had opportunities with probation, services, mental health treatment, and all those types of things?
Absolutely.
And in this case, as you perused Mr. Redden's PSI, did you see evidence to suggest that he had had several opportunities with the system when it comes to services?
I did. All of the crimes that we see, they're in a chart form, and then next to the chart is kind of what they got, probation, prison, violations and whatnot. And so you can tell that he had had probation a number of times, that he had violated a number of times. According to his report, he had gone through mental health court, had multiple sanctions and got in trouble a lot of times, but ultimately was passed through and graduated from the mental health court program. According to the PSI 2 times, he definitely had jail terms, and he had been to prison for on 1 term.
And so you had mentioned a moment ago, you have since realized that you previously revoked his probation.
Correct.
I want the record to be clear about that. When you're reviewing his PSI, preparing to sentence him when the incident occurs, you don't recall that information.
No. No clue.
Fair to say there are hundreds, if not thousands, of criminal defendants who've come in front of you over the years.
Yes.
And you have since learned that you had previously revoked his probation and sent him to jail.
Correct. And I don't know if I sent him to jail. I don't know if he was in custody and he stipulated that he had violated his probation. I mean, he may have been agreeable to it. I don't know any of the facts of that. I just know that I somehow ruled you're revoked.
Understood. I want to now move forward to January 3rd of this year. So on that date, you proceed into court for your criminal calendar. Do you remember how many matters you had on that day?
I don't.
Were there a mix of both in custody and out of custody defendants?
Yes.
At some point in time, did Mr. Redden, was his case called?
It was.
If you can summarize for the jury what happened when his case was called initially.
I mean, nothing. It was just the typical. He was in on a bench warrant return as well because after we let him out, he didn't show up. So Mr. Almasi, his attorney, had put him on for a bench warrant return, meaning come into court and ask not to quash the warrant, not to arrest him on it. And so
everyone understands he was out of custody on the day of his sentencing.
he was.
He had a bench warrant in that case, but he walked in from the street.
Correct.
When
He had failed to appear at the prior sentencing date.
okay, that's what I'm looking for, Judge. So there was a prior sentencing date. He doesn't show up for that. A bench warrant is generated, and then he comes in out of custody at the second sentencing.
Right.
Explain for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how it is that the sentencing starts to proceed. Who talks first and how does that go?
The state always has the right to argue first. in a lot of negotiations, they'll negotiate away the right to argue for any particular sentence. They might agree to probation. They might make no recommendations. There's a number of things. They could stipulate to a sentence per the deal. In this case, because the defendant failed to appear, any negotiation previously offered by the state is off the table, and the state, what we call, regains the right to argue. So even if they were agreeing to some other sentence previous, because he failed to appear, they have the right to argue for the sentence. So,
So in this case, that occurred, and then I would
Correct.
presume the deputy district attorney that was in court that day would argue the sentence.
he did.
And he would recommend whatever sentence he deemed appropriate.
He did.
Ultimately, the decision would have been up to you.
It was.
After the district attorney argues for their sentence, what happens next?
Then I turn to the defendant, Mr. Redden. He goes next. Do you have anything to say to the court before I pronounce sentence? And he was very calm and articulate, and basically he's been doing great. He's at a better place than he ever was before. And, you know, I pointed out your violent history, your failure to appear, and I don't remember whether mental illness came up, but I had said that he had been through mental health court. In his PSI, he had claimed that mental illness wasn't an issue for him, so it's kind of hard to, I didn't know how to reconcile it. But anyway, he had talked about he was going to have a job with the Teamsters and he was going to do all this stuff. Meanwhile, he had no employment history whatsoever, that, at least according to the PSI, there was no employment history. So I don't know where he was going, but anyway, he was calm. And he said,
Go ahead.
I think you should give me probation. He said, and we talked about his criminal history, and it's just so much violence. And
Let me ask you some very specific
Sure.
questions. When Mr. Redden was speaking in court, did you observe any signs of impairment?
no,
Did you observe any signs of mental distress or disease or hallucinations or anything of that nature?
absolutely not.
Had you observed something to that effect, would it have been concerning to you?
Of course,
Are there times in which the court needs to jump in and say, hey, it's not appropriate to proceed today?
absolutely
Here, did you see anything that caused you concern while Mr. Redden spoke?
not at all.
After Mr. Redden spoke, who spoke next?
Mr. Almasi,
And who is that?
his attorney, Caesar.
And was Mr. Almasi permitted to make a full argument to the court and ask for leniency and whatever he wanted to?
He was.
And did he do so?
He did.
Now, in a moment, I want to play some video for you. Judge, with the court's permission, we've previously stipulated to 58. May I publish?
You may.
No, they should, let me see. No, they should be on already, but maybe the tape is going off. Somebody has it. Where's the remote go? Oh, he has it, okay.
Before we get there, Judge, up until that point, District Attorney speaks, Mr. Redden speaks, Defense Attorney speaks. Was everything proceeding as you expect a sentencing proceeding?
Yes.
Were there any signs at all that this was going to get out of control or violent?
No, it was actually completely contrary, because he was, like I said, calm and articulate, and he said, you know, this is what I'm doing. But at the same time, he said, but Judge, I understand you got to do what you think is right, and I understand that. So it was better than I would normally hope, I guess.
And so, court's permission, 58.
Okay.
3697.
Alright, this is time set for entry of judgment, imposition of sentence. Is there any legal cause or reason why judgment should not be pronounced against you at this time?
No, Judge.
By virtue of you.
3697.
Is that your courtroom on January 3rd of 2024?
It is.
And is that your current courtroom?
It is.
As you look around this courtroom, is it set up a little bit differently than yours?
It is.
The folks that are on the right-hand side of the screen, do you know who they are?
Yeah. The
Who are they?
deputy DAs, Jory Scarborough and Richard Scow.
Thank you, guys.
Judge, is the picture also on your screen?
It is.
Okay.
You can see that on your screen there, Judge?
I can.
The folks on the right, who are they?
The district attorneys, Richard Scow and Jory Scarborough.
And on the left,
Cesar Almasi.
is that the gentleman in the blue suit?
It is.
Who's that taller guy standing in the center of the room?
Shane Brandon, my marshal.
And is Shane Brandon, similar to Marshall Black, responsible for courtroom security?
He is.
Counsel, can I have you approach for a moment?
Judge, before we move on with the video, I want to follow up on a question I asked you earlier. You had mentioned PSI. What does that actually mean?
Pre-sentence investigation report.
And is that, as you described, several pages long, and it would give not only criminal history of an individual, but where they're from, their childhood, their background, their marital status, their health, and various other things.
Yes.
Essentially, it's a packet that is supposed to give you everything you need to sentence an individual appropriately.
Correct.
These individuals down here on the left, you can see at least one of them. Who are these folks?
Those are the other inmates.
And so they are in your courtroom, they're sitting where our jury is sitting today.
Correct.
And those are in custody defendants, is that right?
Right.
When a defendant shows up out of custody, do they sit back in the gallery area here?
They do.
And as you mentioned before, Mr. Redden was out of custody.
He was.
I'm going to resume the video.
Alright. This is time set for entry of judgment, imposition of sentence. Is there any legal cause or reason why judgment should not be pronounced against you at this time?
No, Judge.
By virtue of you pleading guilty, I hereby judge you guilty of attempt, battery, or substantial bodily harm. My notes indicate the state retained the right to argue to the bench warrant. Is that correct? Yes.
That is correct, Judge.
All right. State.
I think based on the criminal history, Judge, let's see the PSI. I know you see all this, I don't need to rehash everything. My concerns are, there are crimes of violence
Yep.
in the PSI. 3 felonies, 1 probation revoked. But you see on page 5, there are many probation violations or remands on a probation honorable discharge form. But I am concerned based on the nature of the criminal history, home invasions, battery, domestic violence, assault with a deadly weapon in this case that led to an attempt battery substantial. I think felony is appropriate, and I think a prison term would be appropriate.
Is there any restitution or victim impact?
No, Judge, not that we have today. So, but I do think prison is appropriate. I asked the court to impose 19 to 48 on this case based on the criminal history and the facts of this case.
Judge, could you hear that okay?
Uh-huh.
When the deputy district attorney asked for 19 to 48, just describe what that means in our world.
The attempt battery with substantial bodily harm that he was charged with could be treated either as a felony, where you could get 1 to 4 years in prison, or it could be treated as a gross misdemeanor. You get up to 364 days in the Clark County Detention Center. He was asking that it be treated as a felony, the 1 to 4, and he was asking for the maximum sentence under that felony, 19 to 48. It's 19 months to 48 months. Here in Nevada, you get a max and a minimum sentence, so you get the 48 months or the 4 years. The minimum is supposed to be a truth in sentencing to let you know how much you have to serve before you are eligible for parole. And that would be the 19 to 48. The minimum can't exceed 40% of the maximum, so truly the maximum minimum and the maximum in this case was 19 to 48 months.
Mr. Redden, is there anything you want to say on your own behalf before I pronounce sentence?
So basically, I would like to tell the courts and everyone here, like, based on my criminal history, like, I feel that, like, I shouldn't be, like, sent to prison for a second time.
Have you looked at your criminal history?
Huh?
Have you looked at your criminal history?
I actually just, I looked at it and gave
When you lived it, I suppose.
I just looked at it, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know.
3 felonies, a gross, 9 misdemeanors, multiple DVs. Got a lot going on, sir.
Yeah, I just figured, like.
Battery on a protected person, robberies, attempt home invasion. Go ahead, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I just figure, like, I'm in a better place in my mind, my mental health. I have a support system. I just got hired as a teamster for, you know, the union, you know, making $20 an hour. And like the reason behind every single domestic violence, I've been dealing with mental health, and I didn't know that I was dealing with mental health. And they put me in mental health court, and I still didn't know that I had a mental health problem until it was August 2022 when I realized I have a problem with this. And like having a dictionary and like understanding myself, getting to know myself a little better, and applying it to my personality, and having an epiphany at that moment. In those instances, and just like trying to learn from my mistakes, you know. And I feel like I shouldn't be sent to prison, but if it's appropriate for you, then you have to do what you have to do. But I figure that, you know, if I'm in a better place in my life, I'm not doing drugs, I'm not out there committing crimes now, you know, and I feel like I should be given a shot because I'm in a better place than I was then, you know. So, but that's. I'm a person who never stops trying to do the right thing, no matter how hard it is. And I just, you know, and I'm trying, and I never give up trying to do the right thing. I know I'm not a rebellious person. I don't want to be standing there. I don't want you to have to, you know, sit up here and waste your time as well, you know. But the criteria of me saying this is that I'm a person that never stops trying to do the right things, even if it's hard. And I did the best I could. I have mental problems, I guess.
Thank you. Mr. Omasi?
Judge, as contained in the pre-sentence investigation report, my client was diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. speaking with him, it certainly seems that he's following the pattern that this court has seen so many times of self-medication.
We've had 2 goes at mental health court, Mr. Almasi.
He did, and he does have to honorable discharge from probation. So he can do probation. He can be successful when supervised. It is true that he did get dishonorable discharge. He was revoked on a gross misdemeanor that he was being supervised for just very recently. But he is in a different position now. His foster mother, who is present as a show of support, her name is Karen Springer, has provided him a place to live, which is listed on the PSI. His current address is 8 Rose Circle, Apartment A in North Las Vegas. And she very graciously has allowed him to stay there rent-free until he gets on his feet. Now, he is now part of Union 631 with Teamsters and is hoping to work his way through that program so that he can maintain work. He's also reached out to...
Up until this point, Your Honor, you have suggested a couple times that you're not buying the argument for probation. Is that fair?
Fair.
Did you just now observe Mr. Redden move his body position a bit?
Yes.
Did you notice that back then?
No.
Shannon West for any job prospects that are available.
You seeing that now?
I am.
Is it common for a judge and her marshal to have a bit of an unspoken language that goes on when you're sentencing people?
Yes.
You work closely with your marshal?
Very.
And those cues that you've given in court, do they have a bit of a purpose?
They do.
What is that?
So he can get ready for a remand.
And a remand means putting cuffs on someone.
Taking somebody out of custody and putting him in custody.
I'm going to resume the video.
Through them. Finally, Judge, it's not just his mental health that he's been contending with, but he also has a history of IEP in his education. And at 30 years old, he does not have a high school degree. And so we spoke about that as well, and I think it's high time that he did that. I think the court can trust that he is going to perform well on probation. I think he's worth this risk. The court wants the 19 to 48 as suggested by the VA. I would have no issue with that, but to suspend it rather than just send him to prison for any length of time. I think it makes more sense given the circumstances and his ability to do probation successfully that he be given this opportunity.
I appreciate that, but I think it's time that he get a taste of something else because I just can't with that history. In accordance with the laws of the state of Nevada.
All right, before we let that play, Judge, I want you to do your best to walk us through what happens next from your end.
I remember him coming at me and really didn't think that he would ever make contact. And then I just remember it was like a crash sound. I just remember smashing into the wall. I went down, my glasses went up, I smashed into the wall. He was on me, and then I was being pulled down. I was being hit, and I don't know where and by what. I had closed my eyes. I was trying to protect my face and my head. He had me by the hair, and I was still getting hit in the head. In the meantime, I saw my law clerk who was sitting next to me, who had dove almost in front of me as Mr. Redden came at me. And he was on top trying to pry the defendant off me. By this point, I had pulled down. I was kind of laying down like in the back of the bench. I had gone my head from this side to this side. And I just remember saying, help, help, somebody get him off. I mean, in my head, I was completely defenseless. He was so determined and so violent and so... It was scary. I didn't think I was going to get out of there.
I'll give you a moment, and I want to play a little more video and back up a little bit.
Don't do this! Please, please! Wow! Please! Please! Is she okay? Why do you do that? Wow! Hey! Wow! Hey! Radio somebody? Fucking radio somebody!
Can you do your best to describe the level of force he used when you were under the bench and we can't see in the video?
The level of force he used the entire time was superhuman. I don't know. From the time he came through the air and smashed into me, he knocked me literally almost through the wall, out of my chair. He knocked me so hard, he knocked me out of my shoes. You know, when you see a car accident and people get hit so hard by a car, their shoes come off. I mean, that's how hard he hit me. And when I was down there, it didn't get less.
We saw there a couple of individuals jump in, one of them being your law clerk.
Yes.
While, if you remember, if you know, while your law clerk was trying to save you, was Mr. Redden stopped?
He was not.
Can you describe that? What was going on physically and how?
Only by feel. Because
do your best.
I was down in the ground and I could just feel someone going at me who was Mr. Redden, because that's where he was, and I could feel someone trying to pull him off and leave her alone, and you know, this like they're fighting over me. I mean, Michael's trying to pull him off and he's not letting go.
Do you know, based on memory, where his hands were?
I do not.
Do you remember being struck or hitting your head while you were down behind the bench there?
Yes.
Do you remember what struck you?
I do not.
Do you remember what side of your head it was?
Left at that point.
Did Mr. Redden continue to attack you while Mr. Lasso was pulling you off?
He did.
At some point, Mr. Lasso and the others are successful in getting him physically off you. So
3 of them. 3 or 4 of them it took to get him off me.
where did you go, or what did you do once they were able to?
As soon as I was clear enough, I literally rolled onto my bench in fetal position.
I would presume that this was extremely traumatic for you, but I have to ask, do you know if you went unconscious during the attack?
I don't know.
What is the next thing you remember after rolling into the fetal position under the bench?
I remember thinking, why is it taking so long? I mean, there was chaos in the courtroom. There was screaming, the alarms were going off, and there was still a struggle. Again, I couldn't see it. Partly my eyes were closed, and partly it was out of my sight. And so I was just laying there and waiting, and then the next thing I remember is Jory coming up, is she okay? And Michael came up earlier, Michael Lasso, my law clerk, and kind of stood by me kind of, are you okay? And also, at least the feeling I got was that he was the buffer in case they lost control of the defendant again, because he was still very close.
While the attack was actually going on, what was going through your head?
I'm not going to get out of here. And it's a weird thing, because I know that there's video, and there's a part of me going, I'll be dead. But I have 3 kids. They're going to watch. And that's what they're going to see. That's what was making me so mad. Not what he was doing to me, but what he would do to my family. Okay.
Take your time. So, alarms are going off, lots of physical chaos going on. Did you look around? Or eventually were you able to get up and look around the courtroom?
Yeah.
What do you recall seeing then?
Well, behind the bench, there was blood everywhere.
Where did that come from, if you know?
Shane, my marshal.
Did you look at Shane?
I did.
What did you see?
His forehead was literally sliced open, and the skin had been just flapping as he was trying to protect me, even though he was hurt, but he was getting blood all over the bench. There was clumps of my hair on the floor. The calendar papers were all covered in blood.
Eventually is, what I'll call the scene, is it all secured and Mr. Redden taken away?
Yes.
I'm going to resume the video here for a moment. Can we turn that down just a little bit?
Hey, where's Mary Kay?
She's right here. She's right here.
Stay down. Get on the ground.
Please, God. Please, God. Please, God. Please. We're asking you to come in.
Is she talking?
Oh, shit. Damn. He's a dog. Damn. Fucking ass of us, dude. Give me the ring. Where it should be. Yeah, go ahead.
For it. Sit down.
Hey. Hardcore! Hey. Hey. Hardcore! Hey. Stop! Hardcore! Stop! Hardcore! Super! Struggle! Hardcore! Hardcore! Hey, my man! Calm down. Yeah. Hey, you come here, I'll take care of it. That's my guy. Come around. Sit. Huh? You hold in. Okay. That's my guy. Come around. Come around. That's my guy right there. Yo, Kelly, is medical coming? Hey, go. Is medical coming? Yeah, medical? Just don't touch yourself. Yeah, we need medical. Judge, you okay? This fucking ass out of here.
Shane, you alright?
Yeah? Hold it. Thanks. You got some medical? What happened? What happened? Jump over the bench. What? Are you okay? Good. Medical's coming. Come here. Come here. Fucking clapping, weirdo. Jump in the yes. Hey, weirdo over here. Clap. This right here.
Judge, did you see yourself finally getting up there?
I did,
I believe previously you said you don't know if you went unconscious or not.
correct.
Do you remember getting up and trying to walk where there's no exit?
Well, I remember because I've seen the video. I mean,
Okay.
I
You have no independent recollection of trying to get out of the courtroom by going over the other side of the bench?
no.
She hit her head, bro. She hit her head. She hit her head hard.
What are you looking for?
Shoe.
Once you are cleared from the courtroom, can I presume that there was an investigation that ensued?
Yes.
Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department detectives come down and document the scene.
I don't know who documented the scene. By then we were in the back. AMR came and medical was clearing everybody and taking Shane out and stuff.
Eventually, you give a recorded statement like any witness to a crime or a victim of a crime.
I did.
And can you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the injuries you sustained, if any?
Obviously, I hit my head. I did. My family didn't want me driving, so my daughter drove me home, and then they insisted that I go to the hospital and get a scan to make sure I woke up in the morning because it looked pretty scary. The scan was okay, but obviously I had a headache for a few days. The spots where he pulled out my hair, you know how when you get your hair pulled out, it's sore for a while. That was sore for a few days. My arm, my back, everything was stiff, like, you know, you get jostled around. The next day, the worst part for me the next day was my neck. I don't know what it was. I don't know. All I know is I literally, during the day, was holding my head up, like, with two hands because my neck was so sore and so tired. It just hurt. My tailbone, that hurt for weeks. If you ever bruise your tailbone, that just doesn't go away right away. And I was walking older than my age for a while. I didn't get back on the treadmill for 2 or 3 weeks. And when I say back on the treadmill, that means I walk on it. It's nothing. But I couldn't even walk on the treadmill for a couple of weeks. And then it was several months before I could lay on my left arm. I couldn't sleep on it. That was.
What type of injury did you have on your left arm?
That's what took, I think, the bulk of the initial hit. Again, I don't know what it was that hit me there, but I still have, it's been how long now, and there's a round, it's not horribly disfiguring, but it's a definite, you can still see a round, raised, bruised, fleshy, something not like the rest of it, marking where he made contact with me that day. But it took me months before I could sleep on my left side again.
In the days following the attack, were you photographed, and did you and your family members, take photos of your injuries as they progressed?
We did.
Were there several times in the following days where you lost large clumps of hair?
Yes.
I have to ask for the record, ma'am, how old are you?
63 now.
And you would have been 62 at the time of the incident?
I was.
All right, thank you very much. I'll pass it over to Judge.
Okay, Cross.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Arnold.
Your Honor, isn't it true that you didn't have any bruises as a result of this attack?
No?
And
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. What was your answer?
No.
And isn't it true, Your Honor, that you didn't suffer any bleeding as a result of this attack?
That's true.
And isn't it true that you had no broken bones as a result of this attack?
That's also true.
And in regards to your neck, you didn't have any bruising on your neck. Isn't that true?
True.
Isn't it true that you didn't know how many times, if any, that Mr. Redden hit you with a fist?
True.
In fact, you don't know for sure if Mr. Redden hit you with a fist or if you were kneed or anything like that.
True. After the obvious initial.
Correct. And let's make that clear for the record. So when you say after the obvious initial, I'm not talking about the leap, but when you're actually on the floor, you don't know if you're being struck by Mr. Redden with his feet, his fists, or anything like that.
Correct. Just that I'm being hit.
Just that you were being hit. And were you covered up? Was your face covered up at the time?
I'm going to assume so. I mean,
prior to him jumping over the bench, you didn't see him with anything in his hand?
no.
And you didn't see during the attack him having anything in his hand?
No.
You know, you're asking it in the negative, the last two questions, Mr. Arnold, and I'm afraid that it'll come across in the transcript as a double negative. Could you re-ask those questions? I just want to make sure you're getting the meaning that you want.
Yes, Your Honor. So isn't it true that you didn't see anything in his hand?
Yes.
And isn't it true that during the attack, when you're on the floor, you didn't see anything in his hand that he was attacking you with?
Also true.
I'm going to shift gears here and talk about the PSI. In regards to the PSI, you reviewed it.
I did.
And did you, was there a section that you recall in regards to his mental illness?
Yes.
And you were aware that he had suffered from, he had a previous mental illness history, is that correct?
Correct.
And do you recall, was it paranoia and schizophrenia?
I remember schizophrenia. I don't remember what else.
Did you have any concerns going into the actual sentencing hearing about his competency?
No.
Did you make any inquiries to Mr. Malsi, his defense attorney, in regards to his competency prior to proceeding with sentencing?
I did not. If I recall, the mental health history was fairly long ago about his diagnosis of schizophrenia, and that he had gotten some treatment and that he was not on medication. He had graduated from mental health court, and according to him, he didn't feel like his mental health was causing him any issues. That was kind of the summary of the mental health issues as I understood them from his PSI.
Right.
And then coupling that, normally it would be, the defense attorney would be the one to bring it to my attention that there's a competency issue if it wasn't obvious.
Right.
And then that coupled with his appearance in court didn't give me any cause for pause.
Did you note, or was it brought to your attention through your review of the PSI, that on your case, prior to it proceeding to district court, that he was found to be incompetent?
I don't recall he was found to be incompetent. I recall he was referred to competency court, but I don't recall the findings.
Okay. And do you know, after he was referred to competency court, how long did the case languish prior to you receiving a guilty plea in the case?
I don't know.
And again, you weren't aware or made aware by anyone that he was supposed to be on medication at the time of his sentencing?
I was not.
Just check my notes real quick. Was he saying anything to you that you recall when he was on top of you?
I don't recall.
Do you recall if you heard any statements that he said that he was trying to kill you?
I don't recall.
Do you recall anything that was being said to you by Mr. Redden?
I do not. It was literally chaos.
And again, all the blows that you said that you felt to your head, you don't know who gave those blows, number one. Is that correct?
I mean,
You're assuming that it was Mr.
Michael
Redden.
Jury and Richard literally were pulling him off me, saving my life.
Okay.
But for them, I'm not here. But no, I guess theoretically, my law clerk could have punched me in the head.
Well, you said that you experienced blows to your head. Is
I
that
did.
correct? And so, again, there was a huge scuffle and they're trying to get him off of you.
True.
And so you don't know what part of anyone's body that actually landed on your head that could have caused injury.
Eventually, but initially, he was the only one near there
Right.
that could have, yes.
And do you recall also that when you gave your voluntary statement that you stated that you were only struck in the head once?
I don't recall. If I said that, I do.
Okay. And
I don't think I've ever said there was the initial and then there was a second.
okay, I'm going to approach Ms. Pierce. May I approach to refresh your recollection?
Sure.
I did it again. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Just where I have it highlighted.
Where you have started me?
Yeah, just read in between that.
You want me to read it to you?
No,
Want me to
just
read it myself?
read it and refresh your recollection. You know the drill. And I'll ask questions.
Can I keep that?
Yeah, if you want.
There you go. Okay.
And so, based upon your review of the voluntary statement, do you recall how you were hit?
Same thing. I don't know if it was head or elbow, head, hand. Yes.
Okay.
I don't know.
And you don't
I was
know,
hit, but I don't know with what.
Right, and you don't know how many times you were
I
hit?
don't.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
Redirect.
I'll be brief, Judge. You gave a voluntary statement to police that was recorded, right?
Yes.
Subsequent to that, you testified at a prior court proceeding.
Yes.
And throughout that, you've been consistent that you don't remember how many times you were hit.
Yes.
In fact, as you sit here today, you can't tell the jury if you were knocked out or not.
No.
Mr. Arnold,
I think you might have a double negative as well. Could you re-ask that question?
do you know if you were knocked out?
No. I mean, no.
May I approach?
Yes.
There was a question or a line of questioning about whether you sustained bruising. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
Showing you now 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, and 33. Are those documentation of your bruising
Yes.
after the incident? and these will be available to the jury. These are already admitted, Judge, so these will be available to the jury. I'm not going to put them up on the overhead. When you described this attack initially, I asked you about the level of force that was used. And I want you to do your best to describe the level of force used and why it is you don't remember how many times you were hit.
I was hit so hard between the defendant's body and behind my bench. It's a marble wall, and so, like I said, I was hit so hard that I literally smashed into it, and then I was at best dazed. And I was pulled down behind me, and he continued going after me so forcefully and so violently that literally 3 or 4 healthy, strong young men couldn't get him off of me. It was so strong. They saved my life. I tell them that all the time. You guys saved my life.
As that was happening, do you recall a hand on your neck?
I remember being held. No, not clearly, no.
Fair enough. You're doing your best to recall the events as you remember. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you.
I do know I lost hair, a lot of hair from that side.
Thank you.
Any recross?
Yes, just real quick. And, Your Honor, in regards to the bruising, the pictures that you were just shown, those were pictures in regards to bruising on your shoulder, your arms, and your legs and tailbone. Is that correct?
Well, you don't have a picture of my tailbone, but
Your back area.
my lower hip, my
Right.
shoulder, and my upper arm. Yeah.
Okay. And there was no bruising to the face, and there was no bruising to your neck. You have to
You
say,
asked, there
No.
was no bruising, and she's saying no.
but we have to get it verbally, and
Right.
I'll start it over again.
There was no bruising to my neck
There was no bruising
that I'm aware of, yeah.
to your neck, and there was no bruising to your face.
No,
That's
Oh.
correct?
that's correct. Sorry.
Okay.
That's all right.
All right.
I just want to make sure the transcript reads
Reads.
the way that you guys want it to read, that's all.
Right. All right. No further questions. Thank you.
Okay, you may step down.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, next witness?
Your Honor, the state calls Michael Lasso. May I approach your clerk?
Sure.